Trying not to think about the box and what miracles it might bring the next day was pretty much impossible to do. They would all have to try. For now, thoughts were more toward the immediate need for food. Supper was afoot. Supper time and all the rituals tied to it came and went at the Poole's house. But for the apple butter fiasco, the whole evening might have passed without incident. While the major nutritional requirements for a family of 7 children were being met, there was always that odd time when no dessert was available. Certain store-bought items in this category were especially desirable. Close to the top of the cheap but tasty sweet list was apple butter. Mama would buy a big jar of the stuff on grocery day every 2 weeks. A day or two later, that jar was empty. Even when she tried to hide the jar, it only extended the process a day at best. As it happened, grocery day was the Saturday just past, and the jar was nowhere to be found. The boys, all 5 of them, toddler to teen, had exhausted all the likely hiding places. They had all but given up on the prospect of a meal-finishing course of apple butter slathered in the jaws of a great big cathead biscuit. The 2 girls in the family were practically speaking Mama's lieutenants, in that they were allowed to participate in food preparation stuff, as such were privy to the placement of the foodstuffs around the house. That would include knowledge of the as yet determined location of a big brown jar of Bama's best famous down-home apple butter. Yeah, well, Wes, whose equally famous sweet tooth had gotten him into trouble before, ventured an initial interrogative. "Hey, Niecy, you know where Mama put that apple butter?" Now, Wes delivered this query without the slightest hint of the fierce turmoil that raged within him. His sweet tooth was demanding immediate gratification, while his outer demeanor indicated only a passing interest in the sticky brown goo. Niecy, the eldest except for the slightly older Jay, replied cryptically, "Wes, you're looking too hard. Mama didn't hide it this time." Well, that just sent Wes into a full-fledged hide-and-seek mode. Determined more than ever to find the booty, he began anew the quest for the jar. After once again painstakingly examining every possible nook and cranny that previously had yielded the prize, he asked again. This time he addressed Wilma. Wilma, who was the number 3 on the age scale and just younger than Niecy. Wilma's response gave him no more comfort than Niecy. "The harder you look, the less likely you are to find it," she said. "Boy, these sisters of mine can sure talk in circles," he thought to himself. Taking a moment to rest and ponder the very slim clues given him by his sisters, Wes leaned back on his seat. But as it happened, his seat was actually a bench with no back. He very nearly fell over backwards. With acrobatic deftness not usually attributed to him, he chanced to catch hold of the seat with both hands just as his feet engaged the underside of the supper table. The combination of these 2 actions saved him from the inevitable embarrassment of falling to the floor in a comical heap. From his new vantage point, though, he raised his head up enough to examine the miracle of how his feet had saved him from becoming the butt of another family legend. He looked at his feet, and then he looked just beyond them. Up to now, the apple butter quest had concentrated on looking at eye level and above where most things were stored around the house. Wes's feet were situated like a rifle sight that was aimed at a particular spot on the floor right next to the cook stove. His eyes widened and his breath became shallow as the realization of his discovery waved over him. He mumbled to himself involuntarily, "Hey, look over by the stove." First one and then another looked at Wes in guarded curiosity. In unison, They followed his gaze to the spot that held his attention. At once they all saw it. There in plain sight sat a quart jar of, you guessed it, Bama's famous best down-home apple butter. There sat the prize, the object of their affection. Each one of the apple butter hunters took a turn at meeting the other's gaze. Like a pack of hounds in a circle around a single object of prey, each of them wanted the prize, but they all knew that the first that would get there would be at the bottom of the pile of all the scavengers. Just as they were about to make a concerted leap toward that jar, it was no longer there, because Wes had measured the situation and had correctly deduced that while the others were looking at each other, he had a small window of time to make his solitary move. He slid under the table out of view, crawled swiftly to the jar, picked it up, and made a run for the door. He had almost made his break to the back door when Stoink the cat decided outside was where he needed to be as well. Well, maybe Stoink was fearful of the impending clash about to be wrought concerning the mysterious jar of brown goo. Maybe he just needed to go out and do his business, and he chose a most inopportune time to do it. Whatever the reason, Stoink crossed in Wes's path, and in so doing had the misfortune of taking a fast-moving foot to the rear from Wes, who had just reached escape velocity. The back door was unexpectedly opened, and the cat executed a beautiful swan dive, sailing in a high arc through the door, remaining completely airborne over the back porch and coming down to a perfect 4-point landing about a foot beyond the back porch steps. The back door happened to be open because Daddy had gone outside to talk about the loan of one of his red-bone hunting dogs to a visitor. He was on his way back in at the moment, and Stoink the cat took flight through the open doorway. He watched in awe as the cat completed his maiden voyage, accompanied with all the screaming cat sounds effects one might expect from a neurotic feline. Stoink must have thought he had become a pioneer in some sort of new evil cat-tossing event being tested out for the Olympics. While the cat-related portion of this drama was ending, the original pool boy part of the drama was just gaining steam. Wes, who, having initiated the cat flight, was now on his way to becoming a heap on the floor after succumbing to a brilliant open field tackle given by Stoink's fuzzy feline frame. To minimize the effect of a hard crash to the floor, Wes inadvertently let the jar of apple butter loose from his grip. Like the cat, the apple butter jar went airborne. The difference being that this time, Daddy caught the jar in his big right hand in mid-flight. Wes was not as fortunate, and as expected, he landed face down on the floor. As he skidded to a stop, he was joined by a pile of brothers who were chasing close behind. After dutifully frisking Wes, they determined that he no longer had the booty. Looking around, they soon discovered that Daddy was standing over them, projecting his classic disapproving stare. In his hand, he held the jar. Daddy said, "I'm going to put this jar in the middle of the table. None of you boys will take any of it until breakfast. Is that understood?" It was understood. The indignity of having apple butter on the premises, knowing where it was, but not being able to get it, made for a long evening and an even longer wait for breakfast time to arrive. While the apple butter served to divide at first, it eventually helped bring the team closer together, as a wave of sharing visited upon each. That was a particularly good thing given the anxiety that might rightly have fallen them. It's not every day you find a lost parcel with German lettering all over it. It's not every day that you wrestle with a tarp in a chicken house and come out of it a winner. It's definitely not every day that you see magic in its purest form, flying boxes with power over chicken poop. Who would have thought it? The boys might have asked, "What's next?" During the nightly drift-off-to-sleep conversations, the decision came that in the morning they would share, in the apple butter as a team, just as they would approach the box as a team. They would look forward with an expectation of understanding as together they reckoned what purpose their actions might have in their lives. As he lay on his side in his bed that night, Jay looked out the window that was only inches from his face. His sideways view of the yard outside included a partial view of the chicken house about 75 feet away. He drifted off to sleep with no particular concern for the syncopated waves of colored light emanating from the ordinarily darkened chicken house. Tomorrow, he thought to himself, tomorrow we will know your secret.